My name is David Lory Vanderbeek, and I'm with the Constitution Party for the state of Nevada. I wasn't invited to participate in the debate with Dean Heller and Shelly Berkley. So what we thought we would do is go through the debate questions. I haven't seen the questions, and I never watched the debate, and I don't have any notes. So what I have here is someone helping me. I have a group called the Reclamation group here in Las Vegas that are helping me to put together a response video where my answers to the questions, or what my answers would have been in the live debate, can be inserted into the debate in another way. So I hope that you'll gain something and learn from an additional third-party perspective. Okay, my name's David Vanderbeek. I am the Constitutional Party candidate for United States Senate. The Constitution Party in the state of Nevada is the Independent American Party. Just a little bit about my background. My wife and I have 5 children. We're raising them here in Nevada. I'm a 6th-generation Nevadan. I went to high school in Lincoln County High School in Panaca, and my family's been here since Nevada became a state. That's on my mother's side. On my father's side, they came here. My grandparents came from Holland after World War II, and one of the things that's as far as family values go, we have a tradition of fighting and defending freedom and constitutional liberty in this nation, and so it's just an honor and a great privilege to stand up for the values that I believe in and that represent my family's history.
First question comes from Brent Boynton, and he will direct it to Congresswoman Shelly Berkley.
You both have a pretty consistent record of voting along party lines, and we've certainly seen more than our fair share of negative commercials during this campaign. Many Nevadans and many Americans as a whole have grown tired of the growing polarity in between the political parties and ideologies. Are you willing to compromise party ideals for the benefit of the state and of the nation? Please give an example of a time you worked with members of the opposing party for the betterment of Nevada.
This is a great question, because what I would say to you is that it's the Constitution that unifies us all. The Constitution provides us with a framework for being very different and at the same time working together. So as the candidate for the Constitution Party, that's what I would say to you, is that I would always be willing to work with anyone from any party as long as they're adhering to the Constitution. For me, it's not a party issue at all. It's whether my party is following the Constitution or not. It's a constitutional question. And so on any given issue, such as, you can take any one, for example, if you look at in history, if you look at prohibition, obviously this is not a constitutional amendment, because in nowhere is the federal government given authority to regulate what you put into your body in that regard. So that would have been a state power that would have had to been decided by states and still wouldn't have been constitutional. So whatever, in today's, let me give you a more modern example, take any military action by this government overseas. Those actions have to be declared or agreed upon and voted within Congress. And so whether or not the Democrats support it or the Republicans support it is irrelevant, as long as it's the Congress that is voting on the military action, and it's not the President or the CIA or some other organization that's starting the war.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Ray Hager, and it's directed to Senator Heller.
Senator Heller, as you know, Nevada is a leader in national unemployment. And in 2010, during a speech in Elko, you questioned the wisdom of extending unemployment benefits. You asked, quote, "Is the government now creating hobos," unquote. As Nevada's unemployment crisis continues, are you calling Nevada's unemployed hobos?
I think that's it's a remark that's in very poor taste, because historically, if you studied any economics, you would know that people on welfare are generally young and in life transition. There's a lot of things, a lot of factors in the economy that are entirely out of the control of the average American, and for which, in some ways, they're victims. For example, when Wall Street gambles with pensions, and then people lose their pensions, and then are using welfare benefits such as unemployment or something of that nature, they shouldn't be demonized for that when it was the bankers that took the risks. So the other thing that I would say in just kind of developing this answer is why can't Nevada create jobs? Well, one of the things we need to do in Nevada is Nevada needs to be able to take back its land from the federal government and let private citizens develop it in the free market. That will develop jobs.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Diego Santiago, who will direct it to Congresswoman Shelly Berkley.
Thank you, Mitch. Congresswoman Berkley, I was intrigued looking through both of your official websites that both of the candidates have the country of Israel as one of your top issues. Now I ask, why is this international issue at the top of your agenda, and has enough been done to defend our only true ally in the Middle East?
I think that the question is inappropriate in the sense that it's assumed that as though Israel is the only true ally, or can't. It's almost as if you're saying that Israel could be the only true ally we have in the Middle East. If you look at the Washington Institute, there's a lot of influence of Israel in our government. For example, Patrick Clausen recently, who represents Israeli interests in our government think tanks, he called for Israel to carry out terrorist acts to be blamed on the Middle East, specifically Iran, so that we could justify an invasion of Iran. And so I'm really concerned that we're too close to Israel. We need to back away from Israel. Israel has their own nuclear weapons. They need to be responsible for how they use those. And if they choose to start a war, we shouldn't be dragged into that and lose our lives because of their own recklessness. So I'm very cautious in accepting the idea that we're in any kind of legal alliance. I don't know of any formal legal treaty of an alliance that we have with Israel because they have nuclear weapons, which is against the non-nuclear weapons proliferation treaty, for example. So we need to really look closely at how embedded we are with Israel and if that's appropriate, and how that prevents us from becoming more friendly with other nations in the Middle East.
Next question comes from Brent Boynton, who will direct it to Senator Heller.
Most of us have heard of the sage grouse, and to different degrees, Nevadans have a sense of just how devastating it could be to the state if it were listed as an endangered species. Economists tell us it could shut down a lot of our economic development and diversification efforts. Realistically, what can you do in the Senate to prevent that from happening?
This is actually quite a simple question. Again, this goes back to my comment that Nevada, I've often said that Nevada is federally owned and operated. I mean, about 90% of our state is controlled by the federal government, which means that regular citizens can't just go out on the land, purchase it, and develop it and use the resources. If I came to you and said, let's give an example, and I came to you and I said, I want you to live on 10% of your resources and give me the other 90, and I'll decide when and where and how those are going to be used. You'd say that that was absurd, but that is the story of Nevada. I am entirely open to giving or setting aside 10% of our land and resources for wilderness, for nature, for preservation. But 90% should go to the people so that the people can have something for their businesses and for their livelihoods. On the other hand, I am an environmentalist in that I really genuinely believe that we must achieve sustainable growth. We need to be in harmony with nature. We need to develop energy resources in a way that's more friendly. We don't want to soil our own nest, so to speak. I don't agree with the idea of becoming the nuclear waste toilet of the United States. I think that there's other things that we can do besides. I get the whole Yucca Mountain brings jobs and things like that. Look, if you had access to your land as Nevadans, you could create jobs in a lot of other ways. So I think we can do better, and I think we can do better than cutting off all natural resources to the people. So I'm not in favor of that.
Okay, our next question comes from Ray Hager, who will direct it to Congresswoman Berkley.
Congresswoman Berkley, it's been reported that in 2008 you wrote a letter to Representative Peter Stark, who chaired the House subcommittee with jurisdiction over Medicare, urging him to oppose lowering Medicare rates for dialysis. Why in that letter did you not point out that your husband is a kidney specialist, which could be a potential conflict of interest?
This is a good example of the marriage between politics and big corporations. We know that there's essentially a revolving door between international banks and international corporations and their relationships with politics. In other words, these corporations can now legally make unlimited donations to the candidate of their choice. You see, Berkley and Heller are primary examples of how Congress doesn't work for you. They have a 9% approval rating because they don't work for the people. They work for corporations and banks. So what Berkley is doing is par for the course. Now, you have to ask yourself, when you vote, are you voting for someone who actually represents the people, or are you voting for someone who just represents corporations? I think you got to look at the money, and that's what makes a campaign so challenging for anybody with any ethical or moral principles, because my conundrum is that I don't want to accept money from people who are going to accept me, who are going to expect me to write laws or pass laws or budgets that favor them. In a free market economy, you don't favor one industry over the other. You let people succeed or fail on their merits. That's what a free market does. And then you allow that to process its way through the economy. So I believe in freedom. I believe in free market. If Shelly Berkley has indeed done that and is using political means to benefit her own financial interests, that wouldn't surprise me, because I think that's the general standard, and you as Americans in Nevada have continued to vote for that.
Our next question comes from Diego Santiago, who will direct it to Senator Heller.
Thank you, Mitch. Senator Heller, in a Spanish language ad, Congresswoman Berkley accuses you, and I quote, of wanting to go back to deporting undocumented students. This is in regards to the DREAM Act. In 2010, you voted against this bill. I ask you, Senator, what exactly is the problem with allowing undocumented students that were brought to this country as children and who have good moral character to change their legal status?
Our relationship with Mexico, I mean, this is what we're talking about. We have an issue where a lot of people come across the border from Mexico into the United States. And it's an ongoing issue. And in order to address, you're talking about a symptom. We should look at causes of why there's so many undocumented students here from Mexico, from that origin, those families of origin. We should look at those causes rather than the symptoms. I think we, as Americans, if we're prosperous, we have the ability to be charitable and to bring in the huddled masses, so to speak. We're a country that's built on immigration. My grandparents came from Holland, as I mentioned earlier. They didn't come across the ocean and enter the United States illegally. I believe in legal immigration. That's what my family had to do. They had to immigrate legally. They couldn't come here and get on welfare. They couldn't come here without a sponsor. They had to work, and they had to learn the language and the culture. So I'm not really sympathetic to people who come here illegally expecting to be taken care of. On the other hand, I do believe in compassion, I do believe in charity, but I also believe charity begins at home. So until we can get our financial and political and social and spiritual and economic house in order, as Americans, I don't see why we should feel obligated to take care of other people's children. When people cross the border illegally and bring their children here, they do so at great risk. We have a war going on the border in Mexico, and we need to be accountable for our part in that war, which goes to Operation Fast and Furious, where our ATF is giving weapons to the drug cartels that are being used to kill and slaughter immigrants. So if we really cared about these people on the border, if we really cared about Mexico, we would prosecute the illegal activity in our own government, where we know the CIA helps the cartels run the drugs. We know the banks help launder the money on Wall Street. And we know that our government is giving the weapons to these cartels. So if we really cared about Mexico, that's where we would start.
Next question comes from Brent Boynton, who will direct it to Congresswoman Shelly Berkley.
One of the biggest issues we face on the federal level is our overwhelming federal debt. It's gone beyond being just a domestic problem that will affect future generations. It's become a national security issue and a foreign policy issue. What specific steps do you propose the United States take to get out of debt, or at least make our interest payments easier to live with?
This is where I differ greatly from the mainstream candidates, because what we know now from studying the financial realities is that much of the quote-unquote debt that is allegedly ours is not ours. It was created by banks through leveraging debt, through derivatives, through lending practices that are illegal. This fiat currency system, of which the Federal Reserve is a part, in which Wall Street participates and has used assets to gamble with, is a failure, and it's corrupt and it's immoral. We have a debt-based monetary system. In other words, all of our money comes out as the result of debt, as opposed to what our ancestors created was a capital-based monetary system, and that was based on a gold standard. Originally, during the Revolution, our ancestors experimented with a fiat currency standard, using the continental, where the saying comes from, it's not worth a continental, because they realized that fiat currency and money printing doesn't work. It makes things worse. It causes mass inflation, which causes mass suffering. So they went back to a gold standard and they wrote that into our Constitution, and my opponents support the violation of that standard, and they become wealthy and powerful off of that. And that is the standard in Washington, is to violate the Constitution and to use a fiat currency standard, which is going to always end up in bondage for the people. So what we do need would be a major advance and major progress if we went back to a gold standard, because the good money would chase away the bad money. It would compete. If we allowed gold to compete with the U.S., it's not the U.S. dollar, it's the Federal Reserve note that we use. It says right on it, it's a Federal Reserve note. If we let gold compete with that dollar, we would have a much more free economy, and we could recover more quickly from these debts. We also need to make Wall Street take ownership for their own losses and stop bailing them out.
It's from Ray Hager, and he will direct it to Senator Heller.
Senator Heller, in 2011, you voted twice, once as a congressman and once as a senator, for a Republican budget plan that would have changed the Medicare program. Could you explain your plan for Medicare for those under 55, because those are the people who would be impacted by these changes?
So when you're talking about Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, you're talking about entitlement programs that are pay-as-you-go. In other words, the current population has to pay in enough taxes to support those programs. These programs, these pay-as-you-go programs, we're all doomed to failure because of the baby boomer generation is so big, and the current generation Xers like myself, we just don't have the numbers, and that has nothing to do with government. These programs were doomed because you can't pay as you go when your population fluctuates massively in numbers. Those are just economic realities, and there's nothing that anybody in the government can do about those things. So if you want to slam down politicians for talking about program cuts and not having the answers, you're not really in reality. You can have people continue to promise you things through socialism, but socialism ultimately is always a failure, and it's proven itself over and over historically that socialism doesn't work. What really works is freedom, competition, and free market. And if you had been given historically the value of your money instead of having the value of your money robbed, you could all afford insurance. What would life be like in America if we could all have the true value of our currency back and get an honest wage? You'd be able to go out in the free market and purchase insurance instead of going to the government and fighting and arguing over who's going to beg and be the most successful beggar. That's what this country has turned into, whether it's the corporate whores who beg for money, whether it's the average person. Look, bottom line is we are responsible to take care of the elderly. I guess we'll have to suck it, we should suck it up and do it. We need to take care of the elderly out of respect. But these social programs, we're getting bit because of them.
Thank you. Diego Santiago has the next question. He will direct it to Congresswoman Shelly Berkley.
Thank you, Mitch. Since January of 2007, Nevada is in the top of the nation in regards to foreclosures. Congresswoman Berkley, what is your clear plan for more Nevadans to keep their homes and finally get out of this housing crisis that we're currently living in?
Again, this goes back to the banks. During the first Great Depression, this is manufactured depression. You have to understand that. In the first Great Depression, the banks made easy money, easy lending to all the farmers. Then they contracted credit. They stopped loaning money. So it's a manufactured depression. Then the farmers went bankrupt, then they foreclosed on the farmers. That was what happened during the Great Depression. Because the farmers couldn't make the payments on those loans once they stopped putting out loans out there for development. So what you saw is you saw a crash in construction. You saw all this money go into construction, right? It wasn't realistic. It was based on easy lending because the banks understood a couple things. One, they understood that they were going to be able to contract credit later on, foreclose and get the property, but they also did another fancy thing with the derivatives where they wrote insurance policies on all of these homes, and so the banks had the incentive to see them foreclosed on. They didn't have an incentive to keep people in their homes. This is banking corruption 101. Americans need to be responsible for holding banks accountable, and they need to not be so stupid about trying to get into homes that they really can't afford, and they need to not be, oh, well, you can turn around and sell this home for double in 6 years and really believe that. I mean, you had to look at the economic realities, and so things were marked to make-believe. And the assets of the banks are still marked to make-believe because they continue to receive bailout money from the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve has just given us quantitative easing 4, which is an infinite, $40 billion a month for the foreseeable future, holding interest rates down. So we're not going to see a cleansing of this debt mess until those banks have to write off those losses and that they don't have so much control of the market. Because housing prices can't correct, that means wages aren't going to correct and people aren't going to know whether or not they can afford a house.
This question comes from Brent Boynton and will be directed to Senator Heller.
Senator Heller, what is Nevada's best role as a producer of renewable energy and its technology, and to what extent should the federal government subsidize these endeavors?
Well, it really depends. Again, these energy questions are resolved in the free market because I believe that people will want. I don't believe people want to live in pollution and get cancer and die. I believe people want a clean environment. I believe people want clean organic food. I think people want organic medicine and medicinal plants. I think people want a clean environment. And so I say, let the people have the land, let the people have the resources, let the people develop them, and let them compete in a free market, and let them produce in those energy resources that can verifiably and scientifically and independently be shown they are the cleanest. And then I don't know that government can have a place in subsidizing certain things, but what you could have is the government could be, it's always difficult because anytime a government gets involved with any corporation, it's like picking a winner and a loser. And that's why the free market does that on its own. It picks the winners and losers by who puts out the best product, who has the best price, who has the best quality. Government tends to subsidize failure and throw money at failure as though more money will solve the problem. And so the question with any government program, or the answer with any government program that isn't running well, tends to be, well, we're not funding it enough. And that tends to reward failure just like they reward failure on Wall Street. Why do we keep subsidizing bankers that are corrupt idiots?
We have time for another question. It'll come from Ray Hager, and he'll direct it to Congresswoman Shelly Berkley.
Thank you, Mitch. Congresswoman Berkley, I could say both of you have really stood tall for veterans during this campaign, but many veterans are concerned about looming defense cuts. And if they come, how do you make sure that Nevada's Nellis Air Force Base, Fallon Naval Air Station, and the Hawthorne Army Ammo Depot, which are all economic engines for those communities, stay viable pieces of Nevada?
I think I'm actually a veteran, and so I really appreciate the support and the resources that I've received as a veteran. So those are important. I mean, when a man or a woman goes out and gives service and then is possibly injured or has trauma of some kind, and they've just done a good job, I think it is important to support veterans. One really easy way to solve this problem or to alleviate this pressure, I think we should bring our troops home and use that money at home for our military at home. So what do we have, like 160 military installations around the world? We could close some of those down. We could stop, we could also pare down the CIA. They're out of control all over the world with all their little secret wars and in the third world that they're waging and all the drugs they're trafficking. I think the CIA is out of control. We could slash them down and divert some of those monies back to projects for veterans and support for veterans. It doesn't have to be through those facilities. I mean, why don't we make it a little more personal? I mean, how does this particular veteran need support? Let's try to do that. So if we were less focused on creating more disabled veterans overseas and more focused on just taking care of the ones we have, we'd be better off. It'd be nice if we could close down some of those facilities, bring that money back here. And the other thing is, why don't we stop using depleted uranium? Ask my opponents why we don't stop using depleted uranium in the munitions, which creates more cancer and birth defects and things for these veterans and their families down the road. And there's things we can do a lot better for veterans.
And Santiago has the next question for Senator Heller.
Thank you, Mitch. Senator Heller, Clark County School District is the 5th largest of its kind in the nation with more than 300,000 students. Washoe District has over 60,000 students, yet Nevada has one of the worst academic test scores among students in the country. What do you propose should be done in order to better the education system?
Yeah, the education is designed for failure. If you look up a book called The Dumbing Down of America by Catherine Iserby, she was in the Department of Education. She understood the direction this country was going in and that the education system was designed to fail the students. So the way you handle this, the way you handle an education issue is that you get the federal government out of your state's education programs. You have to push education back to the state. You have to let the money stay in the state. You have to let the state and the local communities get back involved in the classroom in determining what's the curriculum, what's this measure of success. I don't think federalization and that kind of standardization has enhanced education. I think it's created more of a bureaucracy, and people aren't motivated. So I think it's been a waste of money. So if the federal government's going to fall on its face with education, why not give the states and the counties in particular, why don't you give education back to Clark County and let them run the show and let them keep the money instead of the money going to Washington and getting back 30% of it to fail? That's what I would do. I would give and the teachers need to have more say at the local level. The principals need to have more say at the local level. The school boards have to have more say, and the parent-teacher organizations at the local level, and get the federal government out of your education, get them out of your schools. And that's what I would say on that.
It's time for the candidates to make their closing statement.
I have a quick question for you. I know that you mentioned something about Yucca Mountain earlier. You said that you would think that we shouldn't be a waste dump, right? What do you suggest we do about nuclear waste? Because it's a really big issue. As you know, like most of our nuclear waste pools are completely full. They're a disaster waiting to happen. They're above ground. They're far more detrimental to us than even the power plant is. So what would you say we should do with all of our nuclear waste? We're way over capacity. if not bury it in the ground? What's your thought on that? I'm just curious.
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, you would have to find, see, it has to be stored somewhere.
Yes.
And it has to be stored in a safe way. I just, my comment on that, the intent of the comment is I don't think that people from all over this nation should use Nevada as their waste dump. That's, you know, if people want to use nuclear power,
which you do not in Nevada.
yeah, if they want to use that, then they should look for a cleaner source to begin with. And I think thorium actually is cleaner than uranium. From what I understand, it's like 95% more efficient. It's something ridiculous that India uses. And it has a much longer life, and it's much less radioactive, and it's much more energy efficient. So using uranium was a mistake to begin with, and it's kind of hard to go back. I mean, sometimes in life you make choices and you really can't undo what you've done. Not in our lifetime, because the half-life is so long. I mean, you're talking about a long time that this waste is. So I would say stop using it until we can find a better source that's not going to poison us and give us cancer. You know, they say it's safe. I have every reason to doubt what I'm told. I don't believe anything this government tells me out of hand, because they say the body scanners are safe at the airports, but the people who were working at Boston Logan are already dying of cancer 10 years later. So I don't believe anything this government says when it comes to safety. Why should I? All the government workers that were at Ground Zero in 9/11 were told that the air was safe to breathe, and they're all dying. You know, we had 3,000 casualties then, but it's been thousands more casualties from 9/11 of the first responders. So the government just lies about the environmental safety. So I mean, we'd have to look at it. We'd have to look at, I mean, I would have to start from ground zero and looking at what would be safe.